"I am the law here," Jake Hollister barked, thinking he was king of the pathetic little world he controlled. But what he didn't know, that day he cuffed the system's worst nightmare. General Marcus Reynolds, a 4-star general, a real warrior, didn't shout, didn't resist. He just looked. And that look alone made the entire precinct tremble. One phone call, one seismic shock. And Hollister? Kicked out of the force like a piece of toxic trash. No one needed revenge. He choked himself with his own ignorance and arrogance. Do you still believe justice is fair, or is it just a game played by those in power? Pale yellow light from towering street lamps spills onto the asphalt, stretching into hazy streaks in the late-day dusk. The parking lot of the military conference center is nearly deserted. High-level meetings often end this late. Only a few scattered cars remain, and footsteps drag after a long, tense day. A large glass door swings open, and General Marcus Reynolds steps out. Even unseen, one could feel the weight of his rank radiating from his calm, upright bearing. A plain black coat drapes over an understated, tailored suit. A slim briefcase rests beneath his arm. Every stride is measured and sure. He needs no insignia, no applause. His presence alone fills the space. A group of young officers chatting nearby glance up, instinctively straightening when they recognize him. A few offer greetings, but Marcus merely dips his head, never breaking stride. He is always like this, correct, quiet, meticulous, down to the smallest detail. A black SUV waits at the far corner of the lot, beneath an old tree swaying in the light breeze. Marcus approaches, slips the briefcase onto the passenger seat and settles behind the wheel. Before starting the engine, his eyes skim the dashboard, a familiar ritual, a security check. His practiced finger taps a small button hidden beneath the steering column. A concealed dash cam flickers on in silence. It is a precaution he never forgets, even long removed from harsh war zones. More than anyone, Marcus knows real danger does not always come from a visible enemy. Sometimes it hides in the ordinary. Years of combat abroad taught him that preparation alone decides life from death, honor from disgrace. The SUV's engine rumbles to life, deep, steady. Marcus fastens his seatbelt, adjusts the mirror, and exhales, shedding a measure of the day's fatigue. As the wheels roll forward, he glances at the road ahead, a short, familiar drive home. Seemingly simple, nothing to guard against. The SUV leaves the conference grounds and joins the main road toward the suburban neighborhoods. Late at night, traffic is sparse. A few trucks idle at the curb. Late-night diners sit shuttered and quiet. The city breathes slowly, like a giant creature at rest. Inside, Marcus lets the radio play soft jazz. A saxophone weaves languid notes through the cabin. He is unhurried. Each passing meter slips beneath the tires like fragments of memory, far-flung campaigns, life-or-death orders, comrades who are no longer here, all silent, unspoken, like the man himself. Even so, some deep instinct never sleeps. A man may grow accustomed to peace, yet the soul of an old warrior knows tranquility is only a thin shell. Behind it, a storm may break at any moment. He keeps the speed at the limit, hands steady on the wheel as if still piloting a transport helicopter under fire, never lax, never careless. Marcus's nature has never changed, whether on Afghan battlefields, in Pentagon boardrooms, or along this quiet suburban street. Occasionally, the yellow streetlight reflects off the windshield, casting his silhouette onto the ceiling, a straight, unyielding shadow that seems to bear its own hidden weight. For all his commands over tens of thousands of troops, Marcus is still just a man, and tonight he wants only to reach home, sit in an old chair, pour a warm bourbon, and gaze at the silent ceiling. Then, in a fleeting moment, he narrows his eyes. In the rearview mirror, two small lights, red and blue, begin to flicker far behind. A patrol car, perhaps. Perhaps not. He neither changes speed nor looks back for long. Decades of service taught him, when danger encroaches, the worst response is haste. The SUV glides on through the night. Behind it, the red fool dots draw closer, neither fast nor slow, like a hunting predator, scenting prey, calmly walking home. Marcus breathes slowly, steadily, like a soldier entering a hot zone. He does not know what fate lies on this familiar road tonight, but one thing he knows for certain: he is ready, as he always has been. Two blurred beams of red and pale blue light, like ghostly fireflies, slowly latched onto the rear of Marcus's SUV. At first, they were faint, like random streaks of light sliding through the night. But after just a few breaths, Marcus could feel it clearly. The vehicle behind was neither overtaking, turning away, nor maintaining a safe distance like a courteous driver. It was tailing him, deliberately and intentionally. Marcus didn't look into the mirror any more than necessary. In some parts of the world, even a shifting glance could be read by an enemy as an admission of weakness. Even back home, where war was a thing of the past, his survival instincts would not allow him to lower his guard. The SUV kept gliding forward. Steadily. The speed was precisely what was taught in safe driving manuals. 35 miles per hour. Not too slow, not too fast. No sudden movements to draw attention. Marcus tightened his grip slightly on the steering wheel, a small motion, but enough to make the muscles in his arm tense, like a bowstring pulled taut, ready and waiting. From behind, the red and blue lights flared again, this time brighter, more vivid, casting a pale reflection on the rear-view mirror. Marcus exhaled slowly, not exactly from fear, but as if acknowledging a reality he could not change. The game had begun. A light tap of the siren echoed. Not long, not urgent, like a cold shoulder tap in the middle of the night. A reminder that tonight Marcus Reynolds was no longer free to roam like an ordinary citizen. He had been chosen, or rather, targeted. Marcus slowly signaled and pulled over to the curb, textbook perfect in his movements. Once the vehicle came to a complete stop, he did not move immediately. His hand rested loosely on his thigh, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Preparations played out silently in his mind, a mental checklist of every movement needed to avoid escalating the situation. One wrong move, a hand gesture too quick, a look too direct, could trigger a deadly misunderstanding. Behind him, the patrol car's headlights blazed into the rearview mirror, bathing the inside of his SUV in a pale, cold white light. Through the glare, Marcus spotted a figure stepping out of the patrol car. A young, tall man, his body tilted slightly, his right hand hovering near his gun, a stance any seasoned soldier would instantly recognize, half ready to fire. A harsh sound rang out as the officer, Jake Hollister, rapped firmly on Marcus's window. Marcus didn't rush. He rolled down the window slowly, keeping his hands clearly on the steering wheel so that no one could claim he made a threatening move. "License and registration," Hollister barked, his tone unapologetically authoritative. Marcus nodded slightly without arguing. He calmly opened his wallet, took out the documents, and handed them straight out the window. Every movement slow, deliberate, just as his military training had taught him. Minimize any chance of being perceived as a threat. While Hollister took the documents, Marcus spoke, his voice low and polite. "Officer, may I ask the reason for the stop?" There was no immediate reply. Hollister was staring at the driver's license, his eyes narrowing as he read the name, Marcus Reynolds. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, but it was quickly masked by a sneering smirk. "Oh, a general, huh? Or are you just playing the part to cover up a stolen vehicle?" Hollister sneered, his voice dripping with suspicion and malice. He glanced around the SUV's interior, as if searching for some evidence to justify his abuse of power. Marcus didn't respond. He simply held his calm gaze, hands still resting on the wheel. His silence, far from showing weakness, only made the air heavier. Hollister, perhaps feeling challenged by Marcus's composure, barked another order. "Step out of the vehicle, now." Marcus knew that at this very moment, any reaction other than complete compliance could be interpreted as resisting an officer. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door slowly, and stepped out. The entire process was being recorded by the hidden dash cam, capturing every move, every word, every hostile glare. Marcus's shadow stretched long under the harsh headlights, his posture straight and calm. He turned as instructed, placing his hands on the roof of the SUV, palms wide open, fingers spread for easy inspection. A familiar position, but this time, not on a foreign battlefield, not before a hostile platoon, but right here, on his own homeland. Hollister's rough gloves frisked Marcus's body aggressively, accompanied by muttered insults barely above a whisper. Finding no weapons or contraband, Hollister's frustration quickly turned into anger. With a contemptuous nod, he ordered, "Cuff him." Marcus felt the cold metal bite into his wrists. The click of the handcuffs snapping shut sounded like a blade slicing through the fragile peace of the night. He closed his eyes briefly, not in submission, but to swallow the surge of contempt rising in his throat. He knew this game all too well. He had seen it play out hundreds of times in human rights reports. People targeted because of the color of their skin, not their action. As he was shoved toward the patrol car, Marcus silently reminded himself, "Stay calm. Remember every detail. Justice, this time, will not sleep." And somewhere, stored inside the cold memory of a tiny dash cam, every second of this humiliation was being recorded. Tonight, the rules of the game had changed, and General Marcus Reynolds was never one to let the game end easily. Under the cold white beam of the headlights, the black SUV looked like a solitary boulder amid the invisible flow of darkness. General Marcus Reynolds stood there silently, one hand resting on the hood, his body steady like a monument of flesh and bone. Behind him, the sound of the patrol car door slamming echoed briefly but sharply, like a formless gunshot. Jake Hollister approached, each heavy step pressing into the rough pavement. His hand rested lightly on the grip of his gun, thumb tapping rhythmically against the holster strap as if following a familiar beat, a gesture that was both boastful and subtly threatening. A few meters away, Marcus could feel Hollister's gaze, probing, cold, and full of prejudice. It was not the look of a law officer seeking the truth. It was the look of someone who had already drawn his conclusions and was merely waiting for a chance to enforce them. As Hollister stopped in front of him, Marcus caught a familiar blend of scents: sweat, gunpowder, and the sharp sting of immature arrogance. The smell of young men who believed that simply strapping a gun to their waist placed them above others. "Stand still," Hollister barked, his low voice pressing authority into each syllable. He leaned forward, frisking Marcus's shirt and pants pockets roughly, with more force than necessary. The latex gloves brushed across Marcus's skin, leaving behind a cold and humiliating sensation. Marcus did not move. He allowed Hollister to search him, letting the insults skim across his skin without penetrating to his core. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood that every moment was being recorded by the hidden dash cam. Hollister's eyes flicked over the driver's license still in his hand, stopping once more at the words, "General Marcus Reynolds." He sneered, half mocking, half incredulous. "Ah, a general, huh?" he repeated, deliberately dragging out the word general, as if it were some tasteless joke. "Guess that makes me an astronaut." Marcus said nothing. His silence didn't satisfy Hollister. It only irritated him further. The instincts of a man who craved control felt threatened by the calm standing before him. A proper prey, he thought, should show fear, should beg. But this man, middle-aged black man with a modest appearance, but a commanding aura, simply stood there, fearless and unyielding. "Who do you think you are?" Hollister growled, stepping half a pace closer, his hand tightened around his gun grip. "Out here, I'm the law." Marcus remained still. He looked Hollister directly in the eyes, not with fire, not with defiance, but simply with presence. A presence that made Hollister uneasy without understanding why. Moments later, Hollister jerked his chin and ordered, "Turn around, hands behind your neck." Marcus complied without complaint. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he was the one controlling the tempo of this encounter. Hollister pulled out a pair of standard city police handcuffs. The clink of metal rang out, sharp in the night air. With unnecessary force, he twisted Marcus's arms behind his back and cuffed him roughly. The metal bit into Marcus's wrists, red marks beginning to form under his skin. To Hollister, this was just a simple act of power. A badge, a gun, a uniform. All enough to convince him he had the right to judge, to punish, to humiliate anyone he chose. To Marcus, this was a scene replayed countless times throughout the long history of this country. But this time, the difference was he had evidence. Every action of Hollister's had been recorded. Every word, every sneer, every wrench of the wrist. Hollister shoved Marcus toward the patrol car, slamming him down onto the hood. He rummaged through his pockets, checked his shoes, searching for something, anything, to justify his actions. But there was nothing. No weapons, no contraband, no reason. The failure only fueled his anger. "Whose car is this?" he growled into Marcus's ear. "My car," Marcus replied, voice steady, each word delivered with unshakable certainty. Hollister scoffed in disbelief. "A black old man driving a car like this? Don't play with me." Marcus exhaled, a long breath that, to the perceptive, signaled not surrender but patience stretched to its limit. When Hollister finally shoved Marcus into the back seat of the patrol car, he had no idea that every second, every minute of this encounter had been preserved and would soon be replayed where real law prevailed, the court. The black SUV remained still at the roadside, its journey lights silently blinking, like an unblinking eye watching every mistake these foolish men were making. General Marcus Reynolds leaned back into the seat, wrists aching, but his gaze was cold and sharp, like a sword waiting to be drawn. The game had just begun, and those who thought they wielded power were merely chaining themselves to their own disgrace. Under the blinding glare of the patrol car headlights, the cabin felt like a sealed furnace, stifling, tense enough for every heartbeat to be heard. General Marcus A. Reynolds sat motionless in the back seat, deep black eyes staring through the dusty safety glass without a hint of emotion. His wrists were clamped in icy steel cuffs, yet his posture remained ramrod straight, unshakable. Long ago, every step he took had forged an unbreakable habit, resilience, and the ability to stay calm even in the direst moments. No complaint, no frightened glance. Marcus Reynolds had walked through brutal wars, faced death and danger, but now what hurt most was not the peril of dying, it was the unforgivable insult dealt to him on the very soil he had sworn to defend. Each second inside this patrol car felt like a verdict being written, yet Marcus kept silent, a silence no words could weaken. Up front, Jake Hollister rested one hand lazily on the steering wheel, while the other rifled through Marcus's documents. He skimmed the papers, face strained with suspicion. Marcus's driver's license was immaculate, photo sharp, text precise. No trace of forgery. But Hollister, armored in arrogance, ignored every flashing red flag before his eyes. He cared nothing for valid papers or clear seals of authentication. All he saw was a black man behind the wheel of an expensive SUV wearing plain clothes with no visible military insignia. This, to him, was the perfect suspect. Someone to punish, nothing more. Hollister looked again at the military ID, the bold name beneath the stern portrait. General Marcus A. Reynolds, United States Army. The name was familiar, one he couldn't place immediately, but his mind refused to connect it to dim memories of news reports he had once skimmed. He didn't want the truth. He didn't want to imagine a world where men like Marcus could succeed and hold power, especially a black man. Hollister clenched his jaw, sneered. "You think I'm buying this?" he said, voice dripping with mockery. Marcus gave no reply. His silence disoriented Hollister further. Men like Hollister, used to subduing others with contempt and false authority, could not bear meeting someone who refused to react. It wasn't that Marcus felt no outrage. He was simply accustomed to people like Hollister, those who held power yet failed to grasp the value of dignity. He'd long grown used to being underestimated, judged by skin color, and he knew that in such moments not everyone could see the unshakable strength within. Hollister's patience frayed. He squinted at the ID again and again, but the details never changed. Every seal, every signature, every code perfectly clear. His determination only hardened because he couldn't accept that a man like Marcus had reached this rank without being an outsider. Deep down, Marcus's success threatened the illusion of power Hollister clung to. "Where'd you print this?" Hollister jeered, waving the ID before Marcus as if it were a joke. "One of those fake card shops on the east side? Or did you snip it together at home?" He exhaled triumphantly, believing he'd struck a nerve. Marcus remained silent, eyes fixed on Hollister, not angry, only disappointed. A quiet, simmering disappointment, not merely with Hollister, but with the society he embodied, still soaked in prejudice, unwilling to admit that black men had not only the right to live, but the right to be respected, to stand on red carpets without fear. Marcus's silence was the perfect indictment of Hollister's actions. It was not submission. It was affirmation that, no matter the insult, Marcus's dignity remained intact, and that silence itself was the heaviest sentence for a fool like Hollister. After letting the ID flutter to the floor, Hollister stood over it, face gleaming with smug arrogance. He failed to see that each loud, crude gesture stripped away what little authority he thought he possessed. In fact, the more Hollister blustered, the calmer Marcus grew, as if he had long outgrown such petty games. But Hollister could not stop. Anger rose in him, feeling mocked by that silence, an unbearable sensation for someone like him. "Oh, really? Think I'll back off because of that badge?" Hollister strode to the black SUV at the curb, confidence slipping into visible confusion. He flung open the door, rummaged inside for anything that might prove his flimsy claim to power, a false lead, any incriminating scrap. All he found was a clearly stamped confidential military dossier and an encrypted laptop with top-level security. No weapons, nothing illegal. Lost deeper in his own doubt, Hollister's pride would not let him stop. He hurried back to the patrol car, brandishing the papers, eyes narrowed in scorn. "I'll show the guys at the station this," he said. "We'll see who this general really is." Marcus merely dipped his head in a slight nod. No challenge, no plea to defend himself. He knew Hollister would always see him as a fraud, but truth would not change, no matter the slurs hurled. Faced with those calm, fearless eyes, Hollister felt a stab of defeat. The black man's composure made him feel smaller than ever. Yet, arrogance still ruled him, pushing him down a path of no return. He had to prove he was in control. Hollister slammed the patrol car door, climbed behind the wheel, and pulled away toward the station. In the rearview mirror, Marcus remained still, gazing out. Red and buoy flashes painting the gray city walls like a wound that never heals. Hollister sensed he'd done something wrong, yet couldn't stop. His counterfeit power blurred his vision. As he drove, an unnamed unease swelled inside him. He couldn't fathom why Marcus's silent fury felt like a pit opening under his feet. Clinging to the illusion of dominion over another's fate, he pressed on. Each rumble of the tires was a beat in a storm slowly forming. He failed to see that his contemptuous acts had trapped him in a situation he could no longer escape. When the car stopped at the precinct gate, Hollister exhaled as though finishing a crucial task. Stepping out, his eyes still betrayed confusion. Dim yellow lights from the station windows mirrored in his gaze. He hurried, signaling officers to open up and start processing. Yet the atmosphere inside was unlike anything he'd imagined. Officers eyed each other in silence, some frowning, some shaking heads, as unease flooded the room. Murmurs spread, but no one dared speak openly. Tension climbed as they sensed something larger at play. Meanwhile, Marcus stood unmoving, eyes fixed on Hollister as if awaiting the moment the officer couldn't foresee. But Marcus had long predicted the collapse of everything Hollister believed he held. Marcus needed no words. His mere presence would unmask the arrogant. Hollister's price would not be a lost reputation alone. It would be the realization that a man like Marcus could never be subdued by insults or petty force. The patrol car crept through the silent suburban streets, its red and blue lights casting warped streaks across the dark pavement. gliding on and on like old scars on the city's skin. In the cramped rear seat, General Marcus Reynolds sat upright, hands cuffed neatly on his lap, motionless, a statuesque calm in the vast night. His eyes, deep as an abyss, betrayed no emotion. They pierced the grimy safety glass, catching the faint glow of passing street lamps, as if seeing far beyond this suffocating reality. Up front, Jake Hollister rested his right arm lazily on the steering wheel while his left thumbed through Marcus's documents, hunting desperately for the tiniest flaw to justify his own senseless fury. Under the flickering cabin light, Hollister's face was taut, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. A tiny ember of unease flickered inside him, quickly smothered by a shell of ignorant confidence. To Hollister, reality allowed no room for his own mistakes. A black man driving a gleaming SUV with a military ID could only be a ridiculous imposter, a blatant con. He squinted again at the card. The bold line General Marcus A. Reynolds printed beneath the uniformed photo was perfectly clear. The name rang faintly, an echo from news reports he had once scrawled past in careless indifference. But Hollister chose to ignore that hazy warning bell. Power, to him, belonged to whoever could crush another with a shiny badge and a holstered gun, not with the truth. Catching Marcus's gaze in the rearview mirror, Hollister smirked. "General, huh?" he drawled, exaggerating each syllable so the sneer soaked into the thick air. "You sure look impressive." Marcus did not respond. He would not lower himself to argue with stupidity. Sitting tall, his mere presence refuted every cheap jeer. Marcus's silence, unflinching, unafraid, irked Hollister more than any shout could have. He felt his authority erode grain by grain under that steady composure. Flailing for dominance, Hollister sneered. "Maybe somewhere in this pile there's a medal for outstanding fraud, too?" He laughed. Alone, a brittle sound in the narrow cab. Still Marcus said nothing. He stared out the window, his eyes void of anger, filled only with profound disappointment. The kind born of witnessing small-minded men claimed the right to judge others without evidence. The cruiser swerved into a narrow side street where the streetlights bled like thin trails of diluted blood on the cold concrete. Hollister jerked the wheel and pulled up to the curb. He wanted this over before colleagues appeared with questions he couldn't answer. His rushed movements couldn't hide the hesitation simmering beneath. "Engine off!" The door flung open. The slam echoed like a gunshot in the quiet night. He yanked open the back door, eyes flashing with barely contained irritation. "Out!" he barked, voice rough. Marcus turned, each motion deliberate yet sure. The cuffs bit into his wrists, making every move stiff, but he maintained that unmistakable dignity. Stepping from the car, he did not bow his head, did not shrink. He entered the night like a warrior stepping onto a battlefield, straight, unmasked. Cold streetlight stretched their shadows across the damp asphalt, weaving an image of stark contrast. Shallow vanity beside unshakable resolve. Hollister seized Marcus's arm, twisted him, and shoved him toward the patrol car's hood. "Hands on the car!" he growled, breath steaming in the chill. Marcus offered no resistance. He raised both hands, resting them lightly on the frigid metal, the gesture almost ceremonial. No reluctance, no pleading glance. Tension thickened, a soundless shroud over the block. The outside world fell mute. Only heartbeats thudded in ears. Only the wind rattled bare branches like bony fingers drumming up the coming storm. Hollister clenched his jaw. Rage flared, not at defiance, but at the man's immovable calm. In that instant, Hollister was no longer in control. He was thrashing in a trap of his own arrogance. Leaning close, his breath reeking of stale smoke and sweat, Hollister hissed, "Who do you think you are? Some washed-up black geezer in a cheap shirt daring to pretend he's a general? Marcus remained silent, hands on the icy hood, back rigid, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. His silence was neither capitulation nor pride. It was deeper, the hush of someone who knows truth stands with him, and that men like Hollister will collapse under their own folly. Night wind rustled leafless branches. Against that whisper, Hollister's growl echoed like a wounded beast clutching at fading power. He thrust a hand into Marcus's pocket, yanked out a worn black wallet, tore the military ID free and shoved it at Marcus's face. This child's trick! The scoff rang hollow in the night. Marcus did not turn. He had foreseen this scene, endured thousands of doubting eyes before. Only tonight, a hidden dash cam was recording every second of brutality. As if to smother his gnawing dread, Hollister made his worst mistake. He crushed the ID card in his fist and flung it to the wet, grimy ground. That card, symbol of 30 years' service, of life and death decisions, of silent vows, now lay among dirt and ignorant contempt. Marcus lowered his hands from the hood and slowly faced Hollister. Under the harsh light, they stood a breath apart. Hollister's fists balled at his sides, teeth grinding. Yet what terrified him was not Marcus's solid frame, but his eyes. Marcus's eyes, deep, cold, unmoving, held no blazing fury, no trembling hatred. They were calm, heavy as stone, bearing a weight not of weapons or rank, but of a dignity that cannot be broken. Ice traced Hollister's spine. Instinct screamed he was no longer in control. The handcuffed man before him was anything but weak, and the truth, silent, unstoppable, was roaring toward him. Panic burst. Hollister shouted like an animal cornered. "Head down! On your knees!" He yanked an electronic shackle from his belt, fingers shaking as he tried to arm it. Marcus remained still. No challenge, no plea, only a stance, firm as bedrock, defying the blind rage poised to strike. One heavy breath passed. The world seemed to hold its own. Hollister raised the stun cuff, palm slick with sweat, thumb slipping over the activation switch in desperate fumbling. Then a voice sliced the night, sharp as steel. "Jake, what the hell are you doing?" Both men turned. Beneath sputtering streetlight stood a senior officer, worn uniform, eyes wide with horror. It was Sergeant Daniels, who had just grasped the dreadful truth behind the name Marcus A. Reynolds. Daniels strode forward, boots thudding, anger vibrating in each step. "Jake!" he snapped, voice taut as a drawn bow. "Release him! Now! Immediately!" Hollister gaped. Arms frozen mid-air, the stun cuff dangling. Fear spread across his face like an oil slick, seeping into every frantic heartbeat. Marcus stood unmoving, watching the scene with the cool knowledge that what must come, finally, was coming. And that night, Jake Hollister would learn that some mistakes, committed in a single moment, can crush an entire life. Marcus's wrists throbbed beneath the icy pressure of the steel cuffs, and every forced step seemed to pile extra weight onto shoulders that had already borne the burden of countless campaigns. The clinking of metal rang through the night like hammers striking a witness's heart. Beneath his outward calm, Marcus felt each fierce beat in his chest, as if every cell were recording the humiliation unfolding, not out of weakness, but because he knew all too well. Some battles need no bullets. The moment dignity is trampled, a storm is sparked. Lost in blind self-satisfaction, Jake Hollister escorted Marcus with the swagger of a man wielding life and death power. He saw nothing beyond the thrill of shackling a black man in cold steel, oblivious to the mortal danger creeping into every arrogant gesture. Hollister's face was taut, a mocking half-smile smeared across it like an indelible stain. He believed he controlled the scene, flashing his dominance. He did not realize that every rough movement, every contemptuous glance, every smug grin was being quietly recorded, second by second, by the tiny dash camera hidden in the black SUV. Marcus did not resist. He stood tall as an old oak, defying ages, unmoved amid petty fury. One abrupt motion, one misplaced glance would be excuse enough for men like Hollister to justify brutality. So Marcus chose stillness, like a true warrior, letting truth itself expose the aggressor to the light of justice. Hollister slammed him against the patrol car. "Face the vehicle," he barked, his voice cracking the night like a whip. Marcus turned his head just in time to blunt the impact, yet his brow still struck the glass. Frigid as ice, a sharp pain flared, but he neither winced nor groaned. Not a sound escaped lips that had once sworn to defend his nation amid fire and blood. Seeing that composure, Hollister felt provoked. The weak man's anger stirred within him. Leaning close to Marcus's ear, he hissed with malicious delight, "You'll get used to this soon enough." His tone was icy, dripping with petty triumph, as though he had just secured a personal trophy. Marcus gave no reply. He let the insult slide away, like rainwater down an old fortress wall. True resolve cannot be shaken by cheap words. Night unfurled around them. A few cars passed, headlights sweeping across the sight of a bound man beneath harsh yellow light, then speeding on, leaving behind the heavy truth they had glimpsed. Bystanders glanced and turned away. They were accustomed to this, accustomed to injustice seeping through the city's veins, accustomed to an invisible fear choking the dream of a fair land. Hollister dragged Marcus along the sidewalk, through a parking lot mottled with tree shadows, darkness pooling like hidden traps. Their heavy steps pounded damp concrete, reverberating like a drum announcing an impending storm. The station door screeched open, an anemic cry from a helpless witness. Stark neon light spilled out, cold and indifferent. When Marcus crossed the threshold, every eye inside fixed on him. Curiosity, caution, a flicker of confusion, but no one spoke. No one interfered. They stood, silent, unwilling accomplices, imprisoned by their own timidity. Hollister marched Marcus to the booking desk, flicking the paperwork contemptuously onto it. "Resisting an officer," he said, voice dry, laced with foolish pride, "and he likes to pretend he's a general." The duty sergeant, an older man named Daniels, looked up. When his eyes fell on the military ID tossed across the surface, something unmistakable shifted in his gaze. "General Marcus A. Reynolds, United States Army." The embossed letters gleamed under the lamp. Daniels glanced at Marcus and, in that instant, understood. This was no nameless street offender. This was a man who had once carried thousands of soldiers' lives, an emblem of the very values Daniels had sworn to protect. A flash of uncertainty crossed the sergeant's face, but he stifled it and turned to Hollister. "You're sure?" Hollister, drunk on arrogance, sneered, "I said lock him up." Marcus offered no struggle as they led him down the narrow hall, harsh neon casting his shadow long over cracked walls. The slap of their boots echoed like lonely mallets, sealing the door on justice. The cell door swung open. Inside, bare, frigid, stood a single steel bench. Marcus stepped through without a backward glance. The door clanged shut behind him, resonant and final, as though closing on a world long habituated to injustice. Within the cramped cell, the air seemed to shrink around him. Fluorescent light flickered overhead, bleaching the stained floor. Seated upright on the cold bench, hands resting on his lap, Marcus stayed motionless, calm eyes fixed ahead. The cuffs had been removed, yet dark welts ringed his wrists. Raw reminders of the insult endured. Silence reigned. Outside, the corridor lay deathly still, a heavy hush like dust settling over an open wound. Marcus closed his eyes, drew a deep breath, steadying his heart to the slow drum of an army mustering for battle. He had survived worse, encircled on foreign fields, bullets inches away, but the stifling air here carried a different bitterness. This was not mere confinement. It was an affront to dignity, a covert betrayal of the ideals he had risked his life to uphold. Even so, Marcus felt no rage. In moments like these, calm is the keenest blade. The real enemy was not the cuffs, nor the walls, nor even Hollister. It was a system that had let injustice fester, like rust eating steel. From far outside came faint sounds, tires rumbling, headlights sweeping walls, snatches of radio chatter, signs of what Marcus already foresaw. Truth was beginning to surface. The hidden dash cam in his SUV was still working, preserving every second, from the shove in the street to whispered slurs to smug faces convinced no one was watching. Marcus knew time favors not the abuser but the truth. Patient, silent, unstoppable. Inside, tension splintered the station's calm. Officers exchanged restless glances. The desk sergeant leafed through the file, face heavy. Down distant halls hurried phone calls, voices clipped with worry. Sergeant Daniels, who had sensed the truth from the start, paced the corridor and halted at the barred window of the cell. Through the mesh he saw Marcus seated, face neither angry nor expectant, only the poise of a man who stands on the side of right, whatever the cost. Daniels sighed and turned away. He knew it was only a matter of time. Out on the street, unfamiliar vehicles rolled in. Military, federal task force, news vans. Red-blue strobes bled across wet asphalt, painting the station walls like open wounds. An ambulance siren moaned in the distance, slow and ominous. Marcus opened his eyes, listening like a hunter to the adversary's erratic heartbeats. No signal was needed. He knew the wheels of justice had begun to turn. And this time, they would not stop halfway. One deep breath, a subtle clench of the fists, a glint of resolve. Marcus Reynolds was preparing once more to meet the coming storm, not as a victim, but as an unbowed warrior. Footsteps gathered, pounding closer. A war drum rolled down the halls. Urgent voices, shouted commands, fists rattling doors. An emergency summons to conscience. Truth was drawing near, and those who thought they could distort it would soon pay the price. The patrol car rolled over the damp asphalt, red and blue lights flashing rhythmically in the quiet night. In the back seat, General Marcus Reynolds sat motionless, wrists locked behind him in icy steel cuffs, yet his bearing never diminished. No protest, no struggle, only a sharp, upright silence, like a concealed blade still sheathed. Hollister drove, one hand on the wheel, flaunting an undisguised self-satisfaction. To him, this was an easy victory, an offender subdued under the justice he believed himself empowered to wield. That satisfaction blurred his judgment. Each passing minute carried him closer to an irrevocable downfall. He glanced at the mirror and saw Marcus, unmoving. The sight fed Hollister's glee. He took the silence as submission, proof he'd been right to suspect, ridicule, oppress. A man like Marcus, he believed, could never truly hold the status those documents claimed. The military ID and driver's license were nothing but a clumsy mask. Tapping the wheel to an imagined victory march, Hollister replayed every taunt he'd spat, every shove, every defiant look he thought he'd crushed, reassuring himself that this was how the world worked, how he asserted power. Marcus, listening from the back, heard it all without a word. He read every thought in Hollister's eyes, his gestures, the smug rhythm of his driving. Yet he chose silence, knowing the strongest reply is often to let truth itself crush the arrogant. The road to the precinct lay deserted, only tire noise on pavement and pale lamplight spilling in blotched stripes. At each intersection, Marcus's shadow stretched across walls, a mute witness to the injustice in motion. Neither man broke the silence. Hollister, convinced he dominated, Marcus, aware any explanation now would be twisted into guilt. The station came into view. A gray concrete block sunk into the quiet neighborhood, harsh white lamps glaring from small windows like cold, indifferent eyes. Hollister braked hard. The car jolted before the concrete steps. He killed the engine, pocketed the keys, opened the rear door. "Out," he ordered, voice dry, devoid of the bare courtesy any human deserves. Marcus stepped down. The cuffs weighted his stride, yet he walked upright, head unbowed. Hollister gripped his elbow, steering him up the steps. Night shift officers inside turned to look, frowns hinting at a vague, palpable wrongness no one could name. Ignoring it, Hollister led Marcus to the booking desk, where an elderly sergeant hunched over paperwork. He tossed the file down with smug pride. "Suspicious subject, resisted commands, documents questionable." The sergeant looked up, eyes flicking to Marcus, and froze. A familiar name flared in his mind. Marcus A. Reynolds. He'd seen it on television, heard it linked to major operations. "You're sure?" he rasped, voice thick with doubt. "Sure," Hollister shot back without pause. "He's faking. People like this have plenty of tricks to fool the police." Marcus surveyed the room. Every face, every gesture, every wary stare, blending doubt, confusion, and faint fear. He needed no words. His presence answered every question. Security cameras swept the scene. Outside in the black SUV, the hidden dash cam kept recording. An unshakable witness. Hollister shoved Marcus toward the corridor leading to the cells. Marcus's leather shoes rang steady on worn tiles, sounding like drum beats heralding a battle yet to fire a shot. A young hallway officer read the file, looked at Marcus, hesitated, then opened the cell door, eyes apologetic. Marcus entered without a word. The iron door slammed, hinge screeching like a hoarse scream in the dead air. Hollister stood hands on hips, inhaling as if he'd claimed a grand triumph, unaware every foolish act of the night had been captured threefold by the dash cam, the station CCTV, and, most dangerous, by the murmuring colleagues now whispering together. Inside the small cell, Marcus sat on the cold steel bench, hands still cuffed. He did not tremble or panic. He gazed through the mesh window, eyes distant, already mapping the steps ahead. The night was long, and the game Hollister had begun would soon be overturned by the very arrogance he wore as a badge of honor. The air inside the precinct felt thick, as if an invisible fog weighed on everyone, yet none dared name it. When Hollister marched Marcus through the main hall, the earlier murmurs fell abruptly silent. Every gaze locked onto them, but no one spoke. Only the clack of shoes on tile echoed, each beat taut with tension. Hollister loosened his shoulders and lifted his chin, as though he had scored a grand victory. In his hand, Marcus's file was displayed like a war trophy. He seized the chance to brag. "Caught a professional imposter," he announced, letting the words boom across the room. "Claims he's a general. Can you believe that?" A few uneasy chuckles rose, not from conviction, but from the odd reflex of humoring a loud rookie like Hollister. A young officer near the coffee machine glanced at Marcus, then at Hollister, a twisted smile flickering before he said nothing. Marcus passed them, dark eyes untroubled. He did not need to look to read those stares, doubt, awkwardness, even shame for how one of their own was behaving. He also sensed other looks, cold, evasive, as though a single meeting of eyes with truth might force them to confront their conscience. Basking in the effect he thought he had created, Hollister slammed Marcus's file onto the duty desk, signaling colleague Daniels to inspect it. "Forged papers," he declared, voice ringing like a gavel. "Calls himself General Marcus Reynolds. Can you imagine?" Daniels flipped through the documents, heaviness settling in his eyes. The military ID felt weightier than expected. The details were crisp, serial numbers authentic, nothing like the crude fakes he had seen. A pang of unease struck him. An ordinary con artist wouldn't hold papers like these. Even amid the precinct's usual bustle, the name Marcus Reynolds stirred a memory he couldn't quite place. While Daniels hesitated, Hollister continued his self-congratulatory parade, embellishing how he stopped Marcus, how he spotted suspicious signs, how he wasn't fooled by the perfect cover. Each tale was seasoned to inflate his own ego. Marcus stayed silent, a rock in a rushing stream. Unmoved by snickers and side glances, he had endured worse, real battles where life hung on a razor's edge. These childish theatrics in a small station were nothing beside the life and death confrontations he had faced. Still, he missed nothing. He catalogued every eye, those that dropped, those that watched quietly, those that wavered yet stayed mute. He did not blame them. Cowardice wears many masks. Sometimes it is merely turning away. In a far corner, a younger officer with brown hair pored over the file, brow furrowed. The name Marcus Reynolds was not unfamiliar. Vague memories surfaced. A general speaking at a memorial, promising in a firm voice that no soldier is forgotten. He opened his mouth, then saw the tense room, the warning looks, and swallowed the words. Hollister sensed none of it. Drunk on his own spotlight, he slapped colleagues' backs and burst out laughing as he claimed Marcus had begged for mercy. A pure fabrication. Somehow, in his mind, Marcus's proud silence was distorted into cowardly submission. Marcus did not correct the lie. He lifted his head higher, eyes sweeping the room again, etching each face into memory. Those who chose silence, those who believed the lie because it was easier than standing for what was right. Suddenly the north door opened and a veteran officer, Sergeant Daniels, night supervisor, eyes weathered by too much, stepped in. He looked at Marcus, then at the file. A name thundered in his mind. Daniels froze, face blanching, then rifled through the papers, verifying every detail. When he raised his head, uncertainty was gone. "Good Lord," he whispered. Turning to Hollister, his voice cracked. "Do you know what you've done?" Hollister, in mid-story, scowled back. "What? I just arrested an imposter." Daniels didn't answer at once. He walked to Marcus, respect and a hint of fear in his gaze. Swallowing hard, he asked in a trembling voice, "Sir, are you really General Marcus Reynolds?" Marcus neither nodded nor shook his head. He met Daniels's eyes with a look heavy with time and truth. That was answer enough. The precinct seemed to freeze. Young officers exchanged alarmed glances. A surge of fear and regret pressed against their chests. Jake Hollister felt his face burn, sweat trickling down his spine. A tiny part of him began to realize he might have made a mistake no lifetime could redeem. The air inside the precinct felt strangled. Every breath, every sidelong glance, every tiny movement of the officers on duty slowed, weighed down as if the very atmosphere had congealed into an invisible mass no one could push through. Sergeant Daniels froze. The intake form still clipped in his hand, but completely forgotten. His eyes locked on the man before him. No longer some black suspect, as Hollister had bragged, but something else entirely. Spine straight, bearing radiant, eyes as calm as a deep lake. No uniform, no chest of ribbons, yet the authority that clung to him eclipsed any fabric a tailor could sew. Daniels swallowed hard, throat dry as if he had gulped a fistful of hot sand. The name Marcus Reynolds roared inside his skull, shredding the last scraps of doubt. This was not merely a name echoed in war reports or solemn military ceremonies. It was welded to operations etched in history. Daring campaigns, rescues that snatched troops from death's grip, speeches that once left America hushed in pride and grief. Standing before him was no criminal, no imposter. It was one of the nation's legendary generals. A shiver ran the length of Daniels's spine. The hand holding the paperwork trembled so badly the sheet quivered. He glanced around for support but found only colleagues' faces bleached white. Eyes wide, lips pressed tight. Recognition was spreading through the room like an uncontrollable contagion. Hollister, oblivious to the undertow swallowing the room, barked, "Problem? Hurry up with the booking!" His voice ricocheted through the dead silence, slapped the concrete walls, and fell onto the cold tile like a useless echo. Daniels slowly lowered the form, his gaze dragging from Marcus to Hollister, a look heavy with accusation. One Hollister, blinkered by arrogance, had yet to decode. A young officer by the coffee maker stepped back half a pace. A female officer, filling out a report, let her pen clatter to the desk without noticing. No one spoke, but the room pulsed with one emotion. They had just witnessed a colossal wrongdoing. Daniels drew a deep breath, forcing words past the knot in his throat. "Jake," he said, voice rough, "do you know what you just did?" Hollister frowned. "I arrested a fraud. What, are you all scared?" Daniels planted both palms on the desk, fingers gripping so hard the knuckles blanched. "No," he said. Each syllable weighted. "You just put cuffs on a 4-star general of the United States Army." A deathly hush blanketed the room. Movement stopped. Time iced over. Hollister went rigid, the sneer dying on his lips. He looked at Marcus, then at the papers on the desk, as if hoping he could somehow bend the truth that had just crashed over him like a hammer. "Impossible," he stammered. "This is a fake." Daniels pointed at the military ID, the embossed seal, the service number, every authenticating detail any halfway competent officer should recognize. "He is real," Daniels said, voice leaden, "and you've made a mistake you'll never wash from your career." Across the room, anxious whispers sprouted amid sharp inhalations. An officer sprinted to a computer, tapped into the military database. One entry, Marcus A. Reynolds, and a flood of files filled the screen. Photographs, commendations, medals, and solemn addresses before Congress. All doubt vanished like smoke before wind. Hollister stumbled back a step, face drained, sweat beading across his brow. The rush of power he had savored moments ago was gone, replaced by the icy void of naked fear. Marcus remained where he was, unmoving, a granite statue of silent contempt. He needed no words, no shouted demand for justice. The truth and his unassailable presence were indictment enough. Daniels removed his cap and bowed his head, a gesture seldom seen in this precinct. "Sir," he rasped, "we sincerely apologize." Marcus gave a small nod, eyes as sharp as a drawn blade. He had no use for rushed forgiveness, no need for panic-born apologies. He required only one thing, justice, and he knew the coming flood would not be easily stemmed. Hollister stood rooted, unable to lift his gaze. Belated remorse flared within him like a slow fire, burning away every arrogant mask he had ever worn. A shrill phone rang, shattering the silence. Daniels snatched up the receiver. A cold voice said, "This is the Department of Defense. We have received an emergency signal from General Reynolds. Do not touch him. Do nothing further. A special responser team is en route." Daniels gripped the handset, eyes flicking to Marcus in reverence and regret. Outside, distant sirens began to rise, like war drums heralding the purge about to descend. The atmosphere inside the precinct freezes solid, terrified eyes, hands clenching each other unconsciously, ragged breaths that can't find their rhythm. Every sound seems swallowed by the weight of the truth just revealed. No one dares move. No one dares speak. It is as though the entire world is waiting to see what General Marcus Reynolds will do next. Marcus slowly rotates his wrists, the handcuffs clacking, an icy reminder slicing through the thick air. He scans the pale faces around him, then turns toward Sergeant Daniels, the man who just bowed an apology. Without haste, without anger, Marcus merely inclines his head, a signal. Daniels, like a man suddenly pardoned, threads through the motionless crowd and snatches the key ring from the duty desk. His fingers tremble as he fits a key into Marcus's cuffs, and the sharp click rings out like a verdict pronounced. Rubbing his wrists, crimson welts testimony to the insult he has endured, Marcus strides toward the duty phone. Every step seems to deepen the gravity in the room, as if the pull of the earth itself has doubled. Hollister still stands petrified, eyes wide, face drained of all color. Part of him wants to lunge forward, but his legs feel encased in concrete. The fear he once mocked in others now shackles him. Marcus lifts the receiver, his broad hand steady, chillingly composed. He dials without looking. The numbers are ingrained like instinct. It is an emergency line, reserved for the highest echelon of military command. On the third ring, a measured male voice answers, "United States Department of Defense. Caller code, please. Marcus lowers his voice, deep and crisp. Reynolds. Confirmation code Delta 79, Charlie 5. A brief silence, long enough for the precinct to hold its breath. Then the voice returns, urgent, impeccably professional. Identity confirmed. Please hold. Transferring to General Anderson's office. Manuels averts his gaze. Other officers whisper anxiously, worry spreading like fire through dry grass. They all know General Anderson, who, in the U.S. military, doesn't. Second only to the Secretary of Defense, he can deploy the entire Rapid Response Force with a single order. This call is no routine complaint. It is a national-level alarm. The line rings once and is answered. General Anderson speaking. His voice booms like a battle drum. Marcus stands tall, eyes blazing, each word forged of steel. Sir, this is Marcus Reynolds. I am being unlawfully detained at a local police station. A heavy pause, not from confusion, but from the weight of the statement. Anderson's tone drops, colder than the winter wind. Location confirmed? Marcus recites the address, brief and exact. Anderson asks nothing more. He understands the gravity of a 4-star general who once saved his son's life overseas, being cuffed like a criminal on home soil. Hold your position, he commands, his voice a sword drawn from its sheath. Rapid reaction forces are en route. No one is to lay a hand on you again. Marcus replaces the receiver with decisive calm. The precinct seems to stop breathing. He turns, sweeping the room with a gaze that makes every trembling officer shrink back. None can meet his eyes. Only Hollister, the man who started it all, remains rooted in place, panicked, like an animal realizing it has stepped into its own deadly trap. Marcus walks to the central desk, rests a hand lightly on its surface, chin lifted. I suggest, he says, voice low and final, that no one leave their post until federal forces arrive. No one argues. It is an order that needs no bluster, its weight compelling instant obedience. Outside, distant sirens rise, sharp, relentless, heralding the storm closing in. While rising sirens on the street pulled a suffocating tension into the police station, at the Department of Defense a man left his desk, the phone still hot in his hand. General Thomas Anderson, commander of the U.S. military's Special Response Force, was not one to panic. 30 years in uniform had forged him into a symbol of composure in any crisis. Yet the call a few minutes ago awakened a reflex that only blood debts can stir. The name Marcus Reynolds was no stranger to Anderson, not merely because Marcus was a living legend, not merely because he had led pivotal operations that shaped recent history, but because, in a distant place at a desperate time, Marcus Reynolds had saved General Anderson's only son with his own blood and life. That memory, though years old, remained vivid in Anderson's mind, as clear as yesterday. During Operation Falcon Spear in a Middle Eastern valley, Lieutenant James Anderson and his squad were ambushed, outnumbered 3-1 by heavy weapons. A rescue signal went out, but the terrain made any approach nearly impossible. In the emergency briefing, amid flame-red maps and cold analyses, someone suggested withdrawing to limit further losses, a practical wartime solution. While others hesitated, one man stepped to the map pointed at the most dangerous spot, where Anderson's son was trapped, and said, I'll lead the strike team. We leave no one behind. That man was Colonel Marcus Reynolds, not yet a general. Without waiting for more orders, Marcus gathered a handful of the best soldiers, planned in under 10 minutes, and charged straight into the kill zone. The mission was bold, nearly suicidal, yet through courage, brilliant tactics, and self-sacrifice, Marcus broke the encirclement and rescued every trapped soldier, James Anderson among them, just minutes from death. Marcus returned soaked in blood, most of it not his own, his face dark with gun smoke, yet his eyes calm, as if he had merely completed a routine task. No speech, no request for recognition. He simply patted James Anderson's shoulder and rasped, "You've got a whole life ahead. Don't waste it." James recovered, continued his military career, later becoming a national security advisor, but his father never forgot the man who had walked into hell to honor a single vow: never leave a comrade behind. Now, hearing Marcus Reynolds' name linked to humiliation, Anderson knew he was doing more than managing an emergency. He was repaying a debt of honor, a blood debt. Striding from his office, he ordered the rapid response team to mobilize. Special units trained to handle severe human rights violations within law enforcement ranks. Within 15 minutes, 4 armored SUVs roared from the nearest base, sirens shattering the night. Each heartbeat in Anderson's chest carried a cold fury. Not blind rage, but the wrath of a man who has witnessed absolute loyalty and now sees it insulted by petty arrogance. Back at the station, while Hollister's colleagues stood stunned, Marcus merely observed. He needed neither haste nor anger. The justice machine he had triggered was already grinding into motion, and this time, none would escape the coming flood. Sirens drew ever closer, red and blue flashes spilling through frosted windows. Officers whispered in panic, grasping for excuses to justify what they had done or failed to do. Hollister, pale and sweat-soaked, clutched a desk to keep from collapsing. Marcus stood tall and silent, a verdict awaiting execution. He did not demand respect. Who he was and what he had done compelled any informed person to bow. In mere minutes, those who dared mock a man like Marcus Reynolds would learn the price of foolish arrogance in a world where honor, loyalty, and justice still matter. The emergency wing door of the Department of Defense slammed shut behind General Thomas Anderson with a heavy thud. Inside, the space was bathed in cold white light, broken only by the echo of military boots striking the marble floor. On the desk, an internal phone sat waiting, the priority alert light flashing without pause. Anderson strode over and lifted the receiver. A 2-factor authentication code was entered in seconds, every motion precise. At the other end, a White House dispatcher's voice came through. National Security Strategy Room, identity and purpose of call. Anderson did not hesitate. General Thomas Anderson, requesting direct line to the President. Priority 1. A brief pause. Then the woman's tone snapped crisp and rapid. Connecting now. 12 seconds later, the large monitor in the room flickered to life. The screen sat the President of the United States. Dark suit, the Oval Office behind him, expression severe. Thomas, the President began, voice steady. What's happening? Anderson came to attention, shoulders square. He wasted no words. Nurse, I've received a direct report from General Marcus Reynolds. He is being unlawfully detained at a local police station. There is evidence of egregious abuse of power and racial discrimination, requesting immediate action. A flash of shock crossed the President's eyes, quickly buried beneath a hard mask. Identity confirmed? Confirmed, Anderson answered without a trace of doubt. Marcus used code Delta 79 Charlie 5. All signals match Pentagon security protocols. The President narrowed his gaze. He knew of Marcus, one of the most revered generals, the man who risked his life to save an entire U.S. platoon in Operation Falcon Spear, and who had repeatedly refused political office to remain a true, neutral soldier. A man like that, handcuffed, humiliated on American soil, right now as the nation wrestled with waves of debate over justice and equity, unacceptable for even a minute longer. Give me every detail, the President ordered. Location, current status. Anderson's fingers flew over the keyboard. The screen displayed a regional map, exact coordinates, the police station layout, the cell where Marcus was held. A rapid response team is launched from the nearest base, Anderson said. They'll reach the site in 7 minutes. The President nodded, hands clasped before him, eyes alight with cold resolve. Listen, Thomas, he said, voice lower. Immediate extraction. Full authority to use minimal necessary force to secure General Reynolds. Anyone who interferes is to be arrested under Clause 14D. Obstruction of military justice. Anderson nodded, tightening his hands behind his back. Understood, sir. The President continued. Notify the Attorney General. Prepare a press briefing if needed. I want the entire process under direct oversight. No one involved in this chain walks away from responsibility. His voice hardened. And Thomas, make sure of one thing. Yes, sir. Backman is to be treated as what he is, a hero, nothing more, nothing less. A silent beat, like an unspoken vow. "Affirmative, sir," Anderson replied, his tone firm. The call ended. The screen went dark. Anderson turned and left the emergency room, the weight on his shoulders heavier, yet his stride quicker than ever. He knew, this time, they were not coming merely to remove Marcus. They were coming to restore justice, true justice, colorblind, prejudice-free, with no mercy for abusers of power. Back at the police station, the first sounds of the storm rolled in. The screech of tires on asphalt, heavy boot steps, radios crackling urgent codes. Marcus stood motionless in the lobby, silent as an ancient tree bracing against the gale. He needed no questions. He knew the whirlwind had arrived. Hollister, pale, edged backward, searching for an invisible escape he knew did not exist. Other officers glanced at one another, tongues tied, feet frozen. The station doors burst open. Men in black armored uniforms, Department of Defense insignia gleaming under the lights, advanced in formation. The Rapid Response Commander marched straight to Marcus, saluting with textbook precision. "General Reynolds," he said loudly, clearly for the entire station to hear, "we are here to ensure your safety. Direct orders from the President of the United States." The station fell into a heavy silence, so deep one could hear individual heartbeats pounding. Marcus dipped his head slightly, then turned a frosty gaze on Hollister. No words needed, yet carrying a verdict as unforgiving as stone. And the storm of justice, began sweeping away all who had forgotten the simplest lesson. No one stands above honor, and no one mocks justice without paying the price. The iron gates of Military Base 17 swung open with a thunderous metallic groan that echoed across the barren airstrip. Midnight's calm shattered beneath the roar of engines as a full convoy of armored tactical vehicles surged out in perfect formation, each one adorned with pulsating red and buoy strobes that tore through the night like warning flares fired into a sleeping world. This wasn't a drill. No sirens welled out of routine tonight. Every headlight, every radio transmission, every perfectly oiled weapon carried the weight of one thing only: presidential intent. Inside the base's Emergency Coordination Center, fluorescent panels glared across the metallic war room, where federal agents stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on synchronized screens. Real-time surveillance poured in. Drone feeds, street cam alerts, aerial schematics of Precinct 45. The room was steel and silence. Not a voice raised, not a moment wasted. The central monitor pulsed a single command in bold white text on black background. "Move immediately. Extract General Marcus A. Reynolds. At all costs. No approvals needed. No room for hesitation." The chain of command began and ended with that order. Around the room, men and women of the Presidential Response Task Force locked and loaded with clinical efficiency. These were not local officers or even federal suits. They were chosen from the highest rungs of service: special warfare veterans, federal marshals, military intelligence operatives. Their directives were clear: secure Reynolds, de-escalate if possible, eliminate resistance if not. One of the ops captains briefed. Target is being held at Precinct 45, suburban perimeter, known floor plan. Staff count, 15 active personnel. Primary hostile, Jake Hollister. Multiple prior complaints. Known for escalatory force. The nods that followed weren't emotional. They were mechanical. No one needed to be convinced. They were not mobilizing for restoration. They were mobilizing for restoration. The convoy thundered through the arteries of the city like blood surging toward a wound. Side streets vanished beneath all-terrain tires. Red and blue lights slammed across window panes, waking startled residents who peered through blinds and whispered rumors before they reached their phones. Helicopters circled above, low and silent save for the wind they carved into rooftops. Ahead of the formation, scout drones zoomed down boulevards and alleys, feeding data into onboard HUDs inside every lead vehicle. Inside those steel behemoths, the agents rode in complete silence, helmets secure, rifles prepped, safeties off, each chambered around with crisp finality. This wasn't for intimidation. The youngest of them barely blinked. Tonight was not about noise, it was about clarity. One man, illegally detained. One system, broken. One answer, swift, undeniable consequence. Across radio frequencies, encrypted signals confirmed perimeter staging. Rooftops, exits, street ends, and potential ambush points were all marked and assigned. As they closed in, the street seemed to grow narrower, the air heavier, and then, just beyond the final turn, the station came into view. A modest building, unremarkable in every way except for the shame it now carried. The agents saw it not as a structure, but as a theater of arrogance, of defiance, of collapse. Inside Precinct 45, the shift had already turned from confusion to dread. The hum of low conversation had died out. Officers stood in clusters, glancing at one another, their earlier jokes swallowed by something they couldn't explain, but felt in their bones. One young officer stood near the narrow front window, eyes wide, lips moving without sound, as the horizon beyond the road turned into a wall of moving red and blue. Not scattered cruisers, not city backup, a full military convoy. He whispered, "What is that?" No one answered. They didn't have to. The tone in the room dropped like a steel beam. The static from the police radios fell silent. Dispatch stopped responding. Command channels went dark. And standing alone at the center of it all was Marcus Reynolds, still calm, still grounded, his shoulders straight, hands loosely clasped behind his back. He hadn't asked for this storm, but it had come all the same, because justice, once set into motion, is not a thing easily called off, and it had remembered him. He watched without blinking as the armored beasts rolled to a stop. Tires hissed. Boots struck the pavement, doors opened in perfect sync, and a sea of black-clad agents poured out, moving not with urgency, but with certainty. This was not a raid. It was a statement. Inside, Hollister stood frozen, his face drained of heat, limbs locked. He could feel it in his chest. The collapse of command, the disintegration of the shield he thought was indestructible. It wasn't fear that rooted him. It was revelation that the badge he wore no longer protected him, that it might never have. The front doors opened, not with a crash, but with precision. The task force commander entered first, flanked by 6 federal agents, and followed by a second wave forming a perimeter without a single spoken word. In his hand he held the official writ sealed with gold foil and signed hours ago in the Oval Office. "This precinct," he announced flatly, "is now under federal oversight. Any resistance will be considered obstruction of a military direct." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was deeper than any warning could achieve. The agents fanned out, checking corners, scanning badges, and locking eyes with every officer present. No one moved. Some stepped back. A few nodded stiffly. None resisted. The commander approached Marcus and offered a slight tilt of his head. Respect, not apology. "Sir," he said quietly, "we're here to escort you home." Marcus responded with a nod just as subtle. It was not gratitude he offered, but acknowledgement, that the institution had finally found its voice again, that the uniform meant something still. He stepped forward. No cuffs, no hands guiding him. The agents formed around him like armor without words. Behind them, Hollister stood alone, shoulders sagging, fists limp, eyes darting to every face, looking through him like glass. The man who had once barked orders now had none to give, and no one left to hear them. Outside, the people were already gathering, lining sidewalks, holding phones aloft. The sight of Marcus Reynolds, walking tall, head held high, flanked by the nation's quiet wrath, would be captured from every angle. It wouldn't be edited, wouldn't be spun. It would be remembered, not just as the night a general walked free, but the night a system, however briefly, did exactly what it was supposed to do. Inside Precinct 45, time seems to slow to an unnatural crawl. What had once been a place of bustling movement, sarcastic banter, and the scent of burnt coffee has turned into a frozen mausoleum of silence. The air is no longer breathable. It feels thick, like cold water, pressing in from all directions. Every flicker of fluorescent light above feels too bright. every creak of a chair too loud. Jake Hollister presses himself against the bare concrete wall, trying to steady his breath, trying to pretend he's not falling apart from the inside out, but the tremor in his hand gives him away. Cold sweat coats his back, soaking his collar, and his chest rises and falls in shallow, frantic pulls. He can still hear the words he'd barked minutes ago, "You're under arrest, boy," echoing in his skull with a kind of hideous clarity. The image of Marcus Reynolds in cuffs, pushed and shoved while maintaining perfect composure, plays over and over again in his mind, like a film loop he cannot escape. Outside, the sirens scream without pause. Red and blue flashes from the cruisers and tactical vans outside strobe through the windows, lighting up the walls like a crime scene and carving ghostly lines across Hollister's pale, sweating face. He tells himself it's just a misunderstanding, that things like this blow over, that the Union will step in, that someone will shield him. But even as the thoughts form, they rot from the inside out. A terrible certainty blooms in his gut. No one is coming. Not this time. The tension breaks with a buzz. A young officer's phone vibrates loudly on the desk, shattering the dead quiet like a glass pane dropped on concrete. He snatches it up, glances at the screen, and gasps, "Shit." Heads snap toward him. With trembling fingers, he turns the phone so the others can see. A single tweet glows on the screen from a high-profile leak account, the kind that Washington fears and every newsroom monitors. Urgent. A 4-star U.S. Army general has been illegally detained by a local police department. Video of abuse of power and racial bias under review. Justice for General, breaking news. A stunned silence gives way to frantic motion. Another officer lunges toward the desk, snatching his own phone. "What the hell is this?" he barks. But he's already seeing it for himself. The flood has begun. Blurry cell phone footage is making the rounds, grainy but unmistakable, Marcus being pushed into a wall. Hollister's mocking face, the smirk, the cuffs, the slur. Hashtags explode in a tidal wave of outrage. Justice for General. No one above the Protect Marcus Reynolds. Across Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, clips appear and reappear from every angle. Anonymous insiders post time-stamped radio logs. Former military officers chime in on national TV, their voices shaking with fury. Public figures begin to speak. Celebrities repost. Civil rights leaders issue statements. And Jake Hollister, who once believed he held the power of law in his hands, realizes he's become the face of corruption for an entire country. His mouth goes dry. His chest tightens. Sweat rolls down his forehead and stings his eyes. Desperate, he scans the room for an ally, anyone who might still stand by him. But every face is either turned away or hardened into unreadable stillness. These were his colleagues, the men who once clapped him on the back and echoed his half-jokes with hollow laughter. Now they look through him, as if he's already gone. One older officer, McNally, 20 years in uniform, just shakes his head. No words. He picks up his briefcase and walks out without looking back. Another officer packs up his things with robotic precision, avoiding eye contact. Even the dispatch clerk keeps her eyes on her monitor, lips pressed in a tight line. Gripped by rising panic, Hollister lunges for the squad radio, shouting, "Dispatch, this is the desk. Question immediate guidance. What are our orders?" Silence, just static, then a burst of garbled noise, then nothing. It becomes horrifyingly clear he's been cut off from the command center. From legal, from the Union, from everyone. No help, no lifeline, no escape hatch. With shaking hands, he slams the radio against the floor. It shatters, pieces scattering like broken glass across his boots. He backs into the wall again, sliding down until he's sitting, head in hands. The walls feel like they're closing in. His ears ring. The noise outside grows louder. It's not just sirens anymore. It's the thud of boots. Outside, the street is transforming into a battlefield of truth. Armored vehicles line the curb. Tactical units disembark in silence, moving with fluid, disciplined menace. A steel wall of law and order that doesn't answer to precinct politics. They are the embodiment of federal federal resolve, dead-eyed, faceless, and unstoppable. Helicopters hover overhead, their spotlights carving circles through the night. Protesters now number in the hundreds, maybe more, and they push against the barricades with righteous fury. On national broadcasts, a red ticker rolls relentlessly. Breaking: U.S. Army general wrongfully arrested. Precinct 45 under federal review. Across the world, reactions pour in. This is racial profiling at its highest level. You don't arrest a general, period, let alone one like Marcus Reynolds. This isn't just disgraceful, it's treasonous. And amid it all, the man at the center, Marcus, stands unmoving. In the central hall, he has not shifted, has not raised his voice. His presence alone speaks volumes. Calm, dignified, and above the fray, he watches the unraveling of the house that dared to cage him. Every officer in the room feels the weight of that presence. It cuts deeper than any gun, than any shouted command. It is the slow, suffocating squeeze of shame, of judgment earned. Then the doors burst open once more, wide, deliberate. The storm has arrived. Armored boots strike the tile with deliberate rhythm. The tactical team enters in full gear, black visors down, weapons slung but ready. Their formation is tight, impenetrable. They do not speak. They do not explain. They do not warn. Behind them follows the commander from the Office of Military Oversight, his coat flapping as he walks with clipped military precision. In his hand is a sealed file. He pauses only long enough to say, in a voice like cut glass, "By executive directive, this facility is now under federal lockdown. Any obstruction will be treated as interference with national military protocol." He raises his hand, and the building is instantly surrounded. Every exit, every stairwell, every path sealed. Hollister, still crumpled against the wall, watches them come and knows, finally, completely, that he is the target. The thunder he thought he controlled has turned on him, and when the agents move, it's like machinery. Precise, efficient, devoid of pity. He doesn't fight. He can't. His arms are pulled back. Cuffs click. He falls to his knees. Someone reads him his rights, and he hears every word like nails in his coffin. "You have the right to remain silent." Behind him, Marcus watches, but says nothing. Doesn't blink, doesn't flinch. And in that silence lies everything. Judgment, justice, truth. The eyes of the nation watch through every screen, and the man who believed he could bend the law to his will finally understands the weight of betraying the uniform he wore. It is not loud. It is not cinematic. It is silent, like the sinking of a ship beneath black water. It is over. The telephone rang for the 5th time in under a minute, then the 6th, the 7th, each shrill peal slicing through Precinct 45, stifling air like a blade, shredding the station's flimsy mask of normalcy. What had started as a routine Tuesday had soured into an emergency no training manual could cover. The room, once filled with the clatter of keyboards and idle chatter, now bristled with dread. Officers moved stiffly, their faces drawn, as if even a whisper might trigger collapse. Outside, red and blue lights from tactical units spilled through the blinds, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The building trembled not from motion, but from pressure, of truth clawing to surface, of justice pounding at the door. Crowds had swelled outside. Protesters held signs. News vans jostled for position. Cameras zoomed in with predatory stillness, recording everything. Every shift of weight, every swallowed breath. Inside, the air reeked of panic, old sweat, and shame. And in the center of it all, Hollister sat collapsed against the far wall, his knees drawn tight to his chest, hands shaking uncontrollably. His once booming bravado had dissolved into stuttering silence. A shattered police radio near his boots spat static, like a ghost of authority long gone. Colleagues who once echoed his laughter and applauded his rough justice now passed him like he was diseased, avoiding his gaze, avoiding the truth. The phones kept ringing. A young officer, face pale, voice cracking, snatched one up, only to recoil. "Who authorized the arrest of General Marcus Reynolds?" barked a furious voice on the other end. "We want answers now." The officer froze, then slammed the handset down. Before it hit the cradle, another phone erupted. On the other side of the room, another officer picked up and went rigid. "We're live," said a voice, calm but biting. "Can you confirm your precinct illegally detained a decorated U.S. Army general? Because this is streaming to millions right now." Marcus Reynolds stood near the center of the chaos, unflinching, his coat draped calmly over one arm, wrists free, posture straight. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The room itself revolved around his silence. Officers stared, but did not approach. Some looked away. One whispered, "That man, he's still composed." He was more than composed. He was monumental. He did not gloat, did not accuse. He simply stood, a fixed point in a roiling storm, his presence making the room's disorder look ridiculous. Then the hallway thundered, bootsteps, urgent and rapid. Lieutenant Charles burst through the door, a sheet of paper clenched in his fist, the seal of the executive office of the president stamped clear at the top. His face was slick with sweat, mouth tight with disbelief. "All actions regarding the detention of General Marcus A. Reynolds are to cease immediately," he announced, voice sharp. "All involved officers will be summoned for federal investigation. This is a direct order from the office of the President of the United States." The room froze. Silence thickened. Charles's gaze swept the station like a floodlight. "Who started this? Who put cuffs on the general?" Heads turned, slowly, inevitably, toward Hollister. The man on the floor twitched, tried to stand, failed, words caught in his throat, his body betraying his panic. The stain of sweat down his back was visible even from across the room. There was no cover, no spin, no way to explain what he'd done. The badge on his chest now looked more like a scar than a shield. And Marcus, still silent, still unmoved. Outside, the crowd was swelling. Chanting, filming, live streaming. Hashtags flooded every platform. Justice for General, end police abuse. Reckoning in Precinct 45. Camera flashes strode through the windows like lightning bolts, illuminating the guilt on every face inside. News anchors narrated in real time as precinct officers scrambled for answers they no longer had authority to give. One young officer dropped into a chair, head in his hands, whispering, "We're finished. This whole place is done." Another nodded mutely, eyes fixed on the exit like it might vanish. Lieutenant Charles crushed the presidential fax in his fist, his voice suddenly low, nearly trembling. "Nobody speaks to the press. Not a word. You'll all need legal counsel. The DOJ's already involved. But the real threat wasn't legal. It was moral. The man they'd detained, humiliated, doubted, had never raised his voice, never once reminded them of his power." Hollister's breathing had turned shallow. His arms hugged his knees. His lips moved, forming apologies no one wanted to hear. He looked up at Marcus, eyes pleading, but the general didn't meet them. He didn't need to. Finally, Marcus moved. He stepped forward, smooth and certain, toward the precinct doors. The lights outside painted the floor before him like a path, red and blue stripes stretching out like the edge of a battlefield. He paused at the threshold, silhouetted in the glow of reckoning. Behind him, no one spoke, no one dared. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had no vengeance to seek, because justice was already unfolding, relentless and precise. His dignity intact, his name now carried by millions of voices demanding reform. What they had tried to bury had become a banner. What they tried to humiliate had become a symbol. The nation watched him leave, watched the precinct rot under its own weight, and knew a line had been crossed. Those who thought they were above consequence now faced a tribunal larger than any courtroom. The conscience of a people finally awake. And Marcus Reynolds? He walked out, not as a victim, but as a verdict, a living judgment on all who thought power could overwrite truth. The main doors of the police station burst open, and the storm truly hit. In an instant, all noise died. No more phones, no footsteps, no breath. Only the thunderous presence of authority finally turned in the right direction. The rapid response team surged in, black armor glinting under harsh fluorescent lights, every movement controlled with surgical precision. Their boots struck the tile like gunshots, the echo hard and cold, cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. At their head marched a commander, his uniform immaculate, jaw clenched, every inch of him radiating federal power. In his hand he held a red-stamped folder, T.O.P., secret emblazoned across the front, and from it he pulled a single sheet as he stopped at the atrium's heart. "By direct order of the President of the United States," he said, voice ringing like steel against glass, "we are here to secure the safety of General Marcus A. Reynolds, and to summon all individuals involved in unlawful detention, violation of civil rights, and abuse of authority." The words hung in the air, heavy, absolute. No officer moved. No one dared exhale too loudly. Some shifted awkwardly, shoulders tensing, backs straightening in an involuntary reflex to the presence of something too real to ignore. Marcus Reynolds stood like a monument among them, calm, tall, untouched. His uniform was simple, unadorned, but carried the weight of every principle the others had violated. Not a hair out of place, not a flicker of emotion beyond the quiet thunder in his eyes. He didn't need to command attention. The room belonged to him by the sheer force of truth. The commander's gaze moved like a blade through the crowd, until it landed on the one man who could no longer hide. "Hollister, Jake," he announced, reading from the page with the coldness of legal inevitability. "You are hereby called under Clause 14D of the Federal Military Justice Protection Act, charges unlawful arrest, assault, indignity, and obstruction of an active military mission." Every word hit like a hammer. Hollister, slumped near the wall, went white as paper. He stammered, lips moving without sound, and took an instinctive step back, like a cornered animal realizing the trap had finally closed. But there was no room left to run. Two federal agents stepped forward and, with a speed born of training and authority, seized him. One twisted Hollister's arms behind his back, while the other clipped the cuffs on tight, too tight. He dropped to his knees with a choked gasp, pain and disbelief collapsing whatever shreds of pride still clung to him. The Miranda warning was read without ceremony, the officer's voice cool and detached. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Hollister didn't resist, couldn't. His arms hung limp, his knees barely supporting him. The man, who just days before strutted through the station with a smirk and swagger, was now a crumpled shadow, staring at the tiled floor as though hoping it might open and swallow him. But the real blow hadn't landed yet. It came in silence. Marcus approached, each step deliberate, the cold light casting his shadow across the wreck of the man before him. He didn't speak, didn't sneer, didn't even frown. He simply stopped, looked down, and held that gaze, not with vengeance, not with triumph, but with something far worse, disappointment. That look pierced deeper than any insult ever could. It was not rage, Hollister saw. It was reckoning, not the fury of a man wronged, but the solemn stare of a man who had once offered others the benefit of decency and had received cruelty in return. It was the gaze of a soldier who had stood under fire and now stood under scrutiny, stronger for it. For the first time in his life, Hollister understood what fear truly meant. Not fear of punishment or prison, but of being seen, of being known for what he truly was, stripped of badges, of power, of backup, just a man, a weak man who had tried to crush a greater one and failed. His mouth opened, some final plea forming, but Marcus said nothing. His silence was thunder. It echoed through every guilty mind in the room. Hollister's eyes dropped, unable to hold the weight of the truth. The commander gave a nod. The agents hauled Hollister to his feet and led him toward the exit. No one followed, no one objected. The other officers, the ones who had laughed with him, defended him, covered for him, now looked anywhere but at his face. The heavy glass doors opened once more, and the wind outside surged in, carrying the distant sound of chanting crowds. "Justice for Reynolds!" they shouted. "No more cover-ups!" The sound was electric, alive, righteous. As Marcus turned to leave, the response team fell naturally into formation around him. Not out of habit, not out of protocol, out of respect. He didn't ask for their protection. It was offered without question. Each step down the precinct stairs was met with the fire of camera flashes, the roar of approval, the emotional surge of citizens who had waited too long to see accountability in action. Reporters shouted his name, activists held signs high, children sitting on shoulders waved small flags. "Marcus Reynolds," someone screamed. "You're a hero." He didn't wave, didn't smile. He only nodded, once, quiet, humble. It wasn't pride he walked with. It was purpose. For him, this was never about personal glory. It was about truth, about the system being reminded that it must answer to the people it claims to serve. Behind him, Precinct 45 stood like a hollowed husk, walls still intact, but the illusion of justice inside gutted by one brutal act and the light that followed. Inside, officers began to shift, not with panic now, but with resignation. They understood. What had fallen tonight was not just a man, but a shield of impunity they had clung to for far too long. As the federal convoy rolled out and Marcus climbed inside, the weight of the moment pressed down on everyone who remained. Justice had not finished its work, but it had begun, and the whole nation was watching. The air in the station lobby congealed. It felt as though there were no oxygen left to breathe. Every soul, officers, clerks, the same people who once laughed and boasted, stood silent, their eyes fixed on an unfolding scene they knew they would never forget. General Marcus Reynolds moved forward at an unhurried pace, each stride steady as a drum beat on the cold stone floor. With every step, the space around him seemed to contract. Tension wound so tight one could hear the quick, shallow breaths of those nearest him. At the far end of the corridor, Jake Hollister stood between two federal agents, wrists still cuffed, head bowed, body trembling. The arrogant veneer he once wore had been stripped away. What remained was a small, pitiable figure laid bare before judgment. Marcus said nothing. He needed no words. His entire being, states, gaze, the measured rhythm of his breathing, already spoke a sentence heavier than any indictment on paper. A few paces from Hollister, Marcus stopped. Harsh neon light sliced down from the ceiling, chiseling his features. Square jaw, fathom-deep eyes, a stare that pierced every false mask the other man had ever worn. Hollister slowly lifted his head. The instant their eyes met, an unseen current crackled through the room. Marcus's eyes carried no rage, no hatred, only truth, cold and non-negotiable. That truth exposed everything: ignorance, cowardice, greed, bigotry, every flaw Hollister believed he could hide behind a badge and borrowed power. He tried to hold the gaze, but within seconds his head dropped, shoulders collapsed, as though the invisible weight of Marcus's stare were grinding him to dust. No shout, no pointing finger, no demand for apology, yet the verdict had been delivered. It was the harshest, bitterest sentence, silent contempt from a man Hollister could never hope to equal. Marcus remained, eyes boring into the tatters of Hollister's defenses. He recalled seeing this look on battlefields, betrayers who traded honor for a scrap of petty power. He also knew such people required no harsh words. Silent disdain is the longest landing punishment. Marcus advanced a single step. Instinctively, Hollister and everyone else in the hall recoiled half a pace, their primitive self-preservation triggered by overwhelming moral force. Marcus tilted his head, gaze unflinching. "You thought that badge made you stronger? You believed a gun granted you the right to humiliate anyone?" Though unspoken, the questions gleamed in his eyes, cutting Hollister like invisible blades, and Hollister understood, with the last sliver of reason he possessed, that he had wagered his life on stupidity and lost utterly. Marcus stepped back, turned away. He needed no further look, no further word. The sentence was complete, pronounced not by voice or force, but by the stature, dignity, and gaze of a man who knows his worth and will not allow it to be defiled. The task force agents guided Hollister out through a corridor of silent officers. No one spoke, no one pled, no one dared shield him. Each footfall thudded like stone, dragging behind it a past he would never escape. Marcus surveyed every face in the precinct. Some officers lowered their eyes. Others, mainly the younger, held his gaze, their expressions a mix of shame, fear, and a fragile hope they would not repeat their elders' mistakes. He did not blame them, yet forgiveness would not come cheaply. Change is not born of grand speeches. It starts here, in bowed heads of remorse, in heavy sighs, in tightened fists of silent resolve. He left the precinct as cold wind whistled through the hallway. Outside, armored vehicles still lined the curb, red and blue beams washing the night sky. A storm had swept this place, but it left no rubble, only awakening. And General Marcus Reynolds, by silent strength alone, made all remember, honor cannot be handcuffed. Inside the main hall of Precinct 45, time had collapsed into something wordless and still. The air was dense, like the very molecules of the room had frozen in reverence or fear. No radio static, no shift in stance, not even a breath dared interrupt what was unfolding. General Marcus Reynolds stood in the center of it all, composed yet thunderous in stillness, like the calm at the eye of a storm whose destruction had already been delivered. Before him, Jake Hollister looked less like a man and more like a memory. Hands cuffed behind his back, shoulders hunched as though the weight of realization had finally landed. The bravado that once lit his eyes was gone. Now only the wild, hunted flicker of a man who had looked into a mirror and seen, finally, the full ugliness of his reflection. His badge no longer gleamed. It hung crooked and dulled on a uniform wrinkled by pain. Sweat trickled behind his ears, but it was not the heat that made him tremble. It was the silence, the unbearable silence of a reckoning that had no use for shouting. Just Marcus, unmoving. Then Marcus stepped forward, one step, and the air shifted. A soundless pressure followed that movement, as though the building itself recognized authority not in title but in integrity. The overhead fluorescent lights cut his shadow long and hard across the polished floor, falling directly over Hollister. It was not just a silhouette, it was a symbol, a specter of judgment. Marcus didn't hurry. There was no need. The room gave him its breath, its attention, its conscience. No one dared flinch. Hollister tried to pull back, instinct tightening his body, but the wall behind him allowed no retreat. He was cornered, not by force, but by truth. Marcus stopped inches away, close enough that Hollister could see the years etched into his face. Not just age, but experience, battlefields, service, sacrifice. When he spoke, his voice was low, not loud enough to echo, but sharp enough to cut clean through every wall of denial. You asked who would stop you. The words didn't need to rise. They entered Hollister like a knife under the ribs. Officers watching nearby stiffened. The question had been real, boomed days earlier with contempt and disbelief by the man who now couldn't stand on his own feet. And here stood the answer, not with vengeance, but with certainty. Marcus leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing, not in fury, but with the precision of a man who had seen war and returned not bitter, but immovable. Hollister's breathing turned ragged. His eyes darted, seeking some exit, but the truth has no doors. Marcus's gaze locked onto him. Not hateful, not even angry, just absolute. Then came the second sentence, soft, final, unshakable. Now, you know. Just 3 words. But in those words was the weight of centuries. Injustice, dignity, silence, endurance, all packed into a phrase that landed harder than any verdict. There was no need for another sentence. The words hit with surgical brutality. Hollister's knees didn't buckle, but his spirit did. His head lowered as if gravity had turned against him. His shoulders caved inward. His mouth opened slightly, maybe to deny, maybe to beg, but nothing emerged. He had been hollowed out by a sentence delivered not by law, but by truth. This was no theatrical takedown. It was a soul facing its failure and recognizing that it had never held power, only borrowed brutality. Marcus straightened, his posture unshaken. His eyes moved across the room. Every officer he passed looked away. Some shifted their stance, others tightened their grip on their belts, but not one dared hold his gaze. Not one tried to excuse. Their silence was admission. Their stillness, confession, and still Marcus did not gloat. He didn't speak again, because silence, wielded by the righteous, is sometimes the loudest force in the world. It says, I do not need your apology. I do not need your fear. I do not need your punishment. I need only for you to witness and carry that weight." The tactical TAM captain, standing by the door, gave a respectful nod, chin low. He didn't salute, didn't need to. It wasn't about protocol, it was about presence. Marcus returned the nod. That small exchange, wordless, meant more than 1,000 press conferences. In that moment, a soldier acknowledged another, not by rank, but by principle. And in that exchange, something unseen passed from man to man. Resolve, turning his back on the room, on the brokenness, on the silence, on the system that tried and failed to humiliate him. Marcus walked away, not hurried, not hesitant, just a steady rhythm of footfalls on tile. Each step was a punctuation mark in a story that would be retold, not through spectacle, but through memory. Outside, the wind had picked up. Red and blue lights still pulsed across the empty street. The air was sharp, clean, as if the storm had swept away something foul and left only clarity. The city seemed different now, not healed, but awake. Behind Marcus, Precinct 45 had sunk into a hush too thick to pierce. The kind of silence that follows ruin. The kind of silence that we'll never forget. Marcus's silhouette crossed the precinct's final threshold and vanished into the waiting night. He left behind no speech, no demand, no vengeance, only the undeniable presence of a man who didn't come to fight, but came to remind everyone exactly what they had tried to crush and failed. Honor, dignity, and the unshakable truth that justice does not always shout. Sometimes it walks in, speaks once, and walks out, leaving everything different behind it. Hollister stood rigid, wrists cinched behind him by icy steel cuffs. Cold sweat beaded on his brow and ran down the bridge of his nose, yet he dared not move. Every twitch now made him feel like prey being hunted. Head bowed, shoulders slack, his body quivered like a building about to crumble. Everything Hollister once believed about himself, about the power he imagined he held, was shattering. The swagger was gone, along with the rush of feeling superior whenever he faced those he considered beneath him. In his eyes, Marcus Reynolds, the black man standing there, was no criminal at all, but a living reminder of the values Hollister had forgotten: resilience, dignity, and the silent authority they bestow. 2 federal agents flanked him, their movements brisk and economical. They were neither rough nor gentle. They simply knew their duty. Hollister was marched out of the lobby like an inert object, voiceless, stripped of human worth. That is how everyone in the precinct now saw him, a man deprived of everything, even respect. The room was deathly still. Every gaze fell upon him, heavy, cold, devoid of pity. No one spoke. No orders were barked. Only contempt and distance marked every face. His former colleagues no longer looked at him as a police officer, but as a traitor. Marcus stood a few meters away, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders set, watching the entire scene. He made no extra move, offered no triumphant smile, not even a nod of approval. He simply stood as a silent witness, an unshakable marker, observing the man who once deemed himself untouchable dragged off like an ordinary felon. There was no anger in Marcus's eyes. He felt no need to expose Hollister's folly in words. His silence was the verdict, evidence that could not be denied. Hollister tried to raise his head in a last, desperate bid for dignity, but Marcus's gaze swept away everything. A single glance pierced every layer of self-defense Hollister had built over the years. It said all that needed saying. The offender was Hollister himself, the one who had scorned every principle. Hollister immediately dropped his chin, eyes squeezed shut, choking on humiliation that surged like a breaking wave. A chill raced his spine, yet there was no retreat. Each step toward Marcus grew heavier. He was no longer an empowered officer. He was a defendant facing justice. His heavy footfalls on the cold tiles sounded like a relentless death knell, sentence long since set, not by statute, but by his own reckless acts. Outside, a crowd was forming. The anger of citizens and reporters grew louder. Camera lenses, strobing flashes, and loud hailers filled the street, summons from the outside world. all directed at Hollister. He knew the doors would open and he would step straight into a storm of public outrage, of press scrutiny, of a nation seething over his foolish deed. No refuge, no excuse. He had made too many mistakes to deny. Each step toward the front entrance dragged thousands of eyes that judged, condemned, and scorned him. A young officer pressed himself to the wall. Catching Marcus's eye, he instantly looked away, unable to bear the weight of that gaze. None dared face Marcus. Words were unnecessary. His look spoke volumes. Marcus blamed them for nothing, but he would not hand out easy absolution. He knew that tonight every one of them would examine their conscience. They would remember Hollister's hollow, panic-stricken stare and ask why they had stayed silent so long. The precinct doors swung wide, white light spilling outward like a vast net over the darkness. All focus fixed on Hollister as he entered. Cuffed, escorted, unable to deny the charges, he could not still the trembling inside, though he tried to maintain a facade of composure. His own footsteps echoed down the long corridor, each echo striking him like a fresh indictment. Reporters surged forward, cameras firing nonstop. Microphones thrust from the throng sliced into his ears like sharp arrows. Police arrested General Reynolds. What prompted this action? Who is this man, really? Everything unfolded too fast. Passing fellow officers, Hollister met no sympathy, only judgment. He felt their distance like frost. The federal agents held his cuffs tight, wordless. They needed no threats. Their presence alone declared he controlled nothing now. En route to the interview room, Sergeant Daniels watched, troubled. Marcus's calm weighed on everyone, but to Daniels, who had seen many injustices, the general's gaze was impossible to ignore. How could anyone look away from truth? Yet the sergeant remained silent, witnessing Hollister dragged off like cornered prey. Dropped into a chair, Hollister felt every eye on him. Silent faces, suspicious, anxious, like wolves staring down helpless game. Unease swelled in his chest. He could not deny it. He had done something irreparable. Outside, cameras kept flashing, interviews rolled on, every detail captured. Hollister felt the full burden of the scandal. Whispered accusations and rapid-fire questions battered his ears, yet he could answer none. He no longer believed the excuses he once relied on. Pride and faith in his supposed power lay in ruins. Across the table, Marcus sat like carved stone. No mockery, no taunt, merely the eyes of a man who had weathered endless trials. Those eyes needed no words. Truth radiated from them, unstoppable. Under that gaze, Hollister grumbled. Marcus didn't have to speak. Hollister had lost long ago, not to force, but to truth itself. "Hollister," said Sergeant Daniels, stepping in. His stare held no anger, only disappointment. "How could you let it go this far? You've thrown everything away." Hollister had nothing to say. Head bowed, his pride lay shattered. All he once believed about power and control was now shards beyond repair. He wondered how he could treat a man who had given his life to the nation so disgracefully, and why prejudice and ignorance had led him here. Outside, reporters thronged. Every eye judged. The question was no longer, why arrest General Reynolds? But how could anyone do this to a national hero? Murmurs rose. Public fury swelled. Hollister still could not answer. Each second in that room felt like a weight on his soul. One truth remained: justice always finds a way, and no one, however powerful, escapes its judgment. Justice overlooks no one who offends it, no matter who they are. As the tactical vehicle's reinforced doors slammed shut behind Jake Hollister, and the van accelerated beneath a kaleidoscope of flashing red and buoy lights, the weight of his fall echoed down the stone steps of Precinct 45. The cameras turned to follow. The reporters spoke in hushed disbelief, but another event, quieter, more surgical, and far more explosive, was already unfolding. Somewhere in the hum of night, a simple video file uploaded to a small social media forum began its viral journey. No flashy title, no trending music, just a timestamp, a few cryptic hashtags, and one unedited clip, dashcam footage from inside General Marcus Reynolds' SUV. The shaky first frames quickly stabilized, and then the world saw it. No commentary needed. A white officer, tall, stocky, with eyes like winter and a palm twitching near his holster, confronted a middle-aged black man in civilian clothes. That man, calm, still, dressed plainly, unarmed, his only weapon, composure. The officer barked questions, demanded identification, challenged his right to even be there. Marcus complied. Every word he spoke was measured, firm, never rising above civility. But then came the moment that stopped the breath of every viewer. A forced search, handcuffs clamped down without justification, a shove toward the patrol car door. And all the while, Marcus never fought, never resisted. He simply stared at the badge, at the weapon, at the man who believed power required no cause. The contrast was thunderous. Dignity versus arrogance. Calm versus hostility, truth versus assumption. In those 3 silent minutes, something shifted across the nation. Within 10 more minutes, the clip was unstoppable. No PR team, no police statement, no wave of carefully crafted spin could cage it. From Twitter to Facebook, TikTok to Instagram, Reddit to national live streams, it spread like wildfire across a drought-stricken landscape. The hashtags surged within minutes. Justice for Marcus, hero not criminal. Politicians scrambled to respond. Civil rights groups issued immediate statements. Thousands of veterans began posting tributes to Marcus. Photos of medals, folded flags, deployment journals, accompanied by captions like, "This is who we arrested." At a small cafe in Philadelphia, a group of students replayed the clip. Again and again, a young woman wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her hoodie, whispering, "Why is it always like this? Why does it take a general for people to finally listen?" In a hospital lounge in Houston, a surgeon just ending a 12-hour shift sat frozen, eyes locked to his phone. After a long pause, he picked up the nearest landline and called the newsroom of the city's largest station. "We need to run this story, not at 6. Now." Across the country, dorm rooms, boardrooms, bedrooms, filled with the soundless voice of Marcus Reynolds being silenced, only to awaken a nation that had slept too long under the illusion that dignity could be mistaken for compliance. Soon, the video aired on every major outlet. CNN broke from international coverage to run the footage in full, no voiceover. NBC and CBS followed. On the BBC, a stark headline stretched across the bottom of the screen: U.S. military general wrongfully detained. Allegations of racial profiling. Even Al Jazeera and France 24 ran the clip on loop with translated subtitles. Social media churned as if possessed millions of shares, comments, duets, stitches, and reactions. People wrote essays and captions. Others said nothing, simply posting the footage and letting it speak. It no longer mattered whether Marcus wore stars on his shoulder or a plain coat. The image of a man, a decorated leader pinned by prejudice, had become the latest mirror held up to America's soul. And mirrors never lie. In police departments across the country, the ripple turned tidal. Retired officers began sharing their stories. Some ashamed, some angry, tales of silence, of complicity, of moments they couldn't forget, but had never dared voice. Now the silence cracked. Unions went quiet. Legal teams backed away. For the first time, maybe he resisted was no longer an option. Maybe he lied no longer applied. The evidence was pure, untouched. No editing, no excuse. Only a country looking into its own face and asking, quietly, what have we done? And yet, in the middle of the storm, Marcus Reynolds himself remained absent from the fray. No press statement, no television appearance, no tweet. He had already said everything he needed to say in those 3 minutes of stillness. His silence became its own kind of roar, dignified, thunderous in restraint. While news anchors debated policy, while lawyers prepared congressional responses, Marcus did something no one expected. He disappeared from view. Not in cowardice, but in trust. He let the truth speak for itself. He let America sit with the unease of a truth too long ignored. As civil rights leaders rallied behind his name, and muralists began sketching his image across the bricks of New York, Chicago, Atlanta, he stayed quiet, not out of apathy, but because he knew that justice, when true, doesn't require spectacle. It needs time and courage, and for once, a nation had been forced to look not away, but inward. That night, in alleyways and abandoned overpasses, something new began to appear. Not protests, not slogans, art. Street art. On a brick wall in Oakland, a life-sized stencil appeared. Marcus in cuffs, standing upright, eyes clear, gaze fixed forward. On a school wall in Brooklyn, a spray-painted mural of Marcus walking away from a jail cell, surrounded by shadowed figures, each faceless, labeled only system, and beneath each image, scrawled in pale white paint, the same phrase appeared: "You can't handcuff dignity." It wasn't graffiti, it was gospel. In these 5 words, the country found something it had lost. Shame, yes, but also something rarer: clarity. That dignity cannot be erased by arrogance, that truth cannot be hidden forever, and that some men carry so much quiet power within them, even their oppression becomes a call to awaken. In cities and towns, people gathered without agenda, lighting candles, leaving folded flags beneath murals, and placing handwritten notes addressed to Marcus. And through it all, the image remained: a man, silent, unshaken, reminding the world that real power needs no permission to stand tall. The doors of Precinct 45 swung open with a low mechanical groan, spilling a wash of cold, sterile light across the gray stone steps. It cast a sharp, surgical contrast against the darkness beyond, like a curtain pulling back not just on a man's exit, but on the reckoning of a broken institution. Outside, the world seemed to hold its breath. No sirens now, no bullhorns or protest chants, just a stillness so complete it made the heart pound. The streets that hours before had boiled with noise were now lined with people locked in silence, as if even a whisper would break something sacred. And from that threshold stepped General Marcus A. Reynolds. He wore no uniform, no ribbons, no ceremonial rank, but his presence burned brighter than any medal. His civilian coat hung plain and heavy over squared shoulders, but there was nothing ordinary about the way he moved. His spine was straight, his jaw set, not with pride, not with defiance, but with a quiet, indomitable resolve. A man who had seen battlefields, command rooms, corridors of power, and who had endured something colder than all of them, being stripped of honor by lesser men who mistook silence for weakness. But now the silence was his ally, and it marched with him. Each step down those stone stairs echoed, not loudly, but deeply, as if the ground itself knew it was bearing witness. Behind him the doors stayed open, because closure had not yet come. Ahead of him stood a gauntlet of uniforms and citizens, not barring his path, but honoring it. Lined shoulder to shoulder on either side of the exit were officers of Precinct 45, the very ones who had laughed, hesitated, or stood idle just hours ago. Now, not a word passed between them. Their caps were clutched in hand, held low, heads bowed, not just from shame, but from the sheer weight of the men before them. No commander had barked this into being. No supervisor had demanded the display. This was instinct, the kind that arises when a truth too long ignored finally walks into the open. Marcus walked forward slowly, passing through the solemn ranks without acknowledgement, yet never once unnoticed. He didn't demand their eyes, but they couldn't look away. There was no judgment in his gait, only finality. And beyond the line of officers stood citizens, black, white, old, young. Some had come out in protest. Others had been drawn by headlines, but all now stood in stillness, their faces lit by the soft flicker of street lamps and the burn of conscience. A few placed hands over their hearts. Others held children on their shoulders, explaining nothing, trusting that the moment itself would carve its meaning. Marcus moved through them like a ship slicing the tide, silent, unwavering, unstoppable. A gust of wind curled through the narrow avenue, tugging at coats and signs, and sending the American flag overhead into a full, snapping wave. Its shadow stretched across the pavement, falling perfectly over Marcus as he passed. It did not lead him, nor did it follow. It marched with him. No one clapped. No one dared. The applause would have felt cheap, inadequate. This moment was not for celebration. It was a funeral for indifference, for arrogance, for injustice committed in uniform. Yet from its ashes rose something sacred, a stillness that vibrated with meaning, and in that stillness, a small voice broke through, barely louder than the wind. A boy, no more than 7, clutched his father's hand as Marcus passed. "Daddy, who is he?" he asked, eyes wide. The father hesitated, swallowed, then whispered, "He's the reason we can hold our heads high." The words did not reach Marcus's ears, but they didn't need to. Their truth was stitched into every glance he met, every bowed head, every posture of respect. When he passed the final officer in the line, something remarkable happened. One by one, from rear to front, the officers raised their hands in perfect military salute, palms to temples, fingers aligned with brow, elbows squared. The sound of movement was so soft it barely existed, but to those watching, it was deafening. This wasn't regulation, it was repentance. And it wasn't done for the cameras. It was done because something inside them, whatever faint ember of the oath they once swore, had been reignited by the man walking silently in their midst. Marcus did not return the salute. He did not need to. Some honors belong to no ceremony, no response. They simply are. As he continued down the main avenue of the city, the crowd followed. Not in chase, but in reverent procession. Phones were held aloft, not for spectacle, but to record history. In homes across America, the footage aired live. No narration, no music, no overlays. Just a single, continuous shot of a man walking out of darkness and into the gaze of a country now forced to look at itself. It became a symbol overnight. Teachers would replay it in classrooms. Newspapers would print it full page, no headline needed. Artists would etch it into murals. Not because Marcus wanted it, he never asked to be the icon, but because truth, when wrapped in dignity and endured in silence, has a way of engraving itself onto a nation's memory. And that night, somewhere deep within the soul of the country, past politics, past protocol, past prejudice, justice stood up. It did not shout, it did not punish. It simply lifted its head, opened the door, and walked out beside the man who refused to bow, not to fear, not to hate, not to injustice. And as Marcus disappeared into the hush beyond the camera's edge, what remained was not absence, but a heartbeat, a pulse, shared by every soul who had witnessed it, and it said, "We remember, and we will not return to silence." The story of General Marcus Reynolds is more than one man's confrontation with injustice. It is a mirror held up to a society still haunted by the silent weight of assumptions, stereotypes, and invisible prejudice. It is not just about what happened in a single precinct on a single night between two men whose paths collided under fluorescent lights and flashing sirens. It is about what still simmers beneath the surface of our everyday interactions. It is about the price of judging a soul by the clothes they wear, the color of their skin, or the calmness with which they refuse to lower themselves to anger. It is a reminder that dignity is not something granted. It is something lived, silently, persistently, and with a kind of quiet power that no badge or arrogance can take away. Marcus Reynolds did not respond to cruelty with shouting. He did not curse the officer who wronged him, nor lash out in the heat of humiliation. He stood, simply, firmly, and in that stillness, in that refusal to betray the values he had carried through deserts and war zones, he offered the world a lesson it sorely needed, that truth does not always need a microphone. Sometimes it only needs to be seen. Too often we forget that behind the plainest of exteriors may live a life of extraordinary sacrifice, that within a single pair of steady eyes lies decades of quiet leadership, of blood spilled for country, of tears shed in silence for comrades lost. And yet, to a man like Jake Hollister, those truths were invisible, because he was trained to see threat where there was only calm, to see suspicion where there was simply silence. In that blindness, so common, so deadly, is what turned a hero into a suspect in the eyes of a system meant to protect him. But the story did not end there. It never does when truth is patient. The world watched as a man who could have raged instead responded with restraint. And that choice, more than any headline or trending hashtag, is what broke the cycle. Marcus reclaimed not only his own dignity, but something larger. He reminded the public, and perhaps even his oppressors, that honor is not defined by who wears the uniform, but by who remembers why they put it on. His dignity cannot be handcuffed. Respect cannot be demanded by force, and real strength never needs to raise its voice. In the echo of Marcus's footsteps leaving the precinct, a different sound followed, one not of outrage, but of reflection. In schools and homes, in coffee shops and churches, people paused, watched, and asked themselves hard questions. Have we too judged too quickly? Have we seen only the surface, never the soul? Have we crossed the street to avoid someone who looked different? Have we spoken louder than we listened? Have we mistaken calm for guilt or pride for defiance? These are not easy questions, but Marcus Reynolds didn't offer easy answers. He offered something better. An example, one that teaches us that power lies not in domination, but in self-control, that justice, when it comes, is not always announced with sirens, but often whispered through the courage of someone refusing to bend under ignorance. This is not merely one man's story. It is our story, a collective reminder that every snap judgment we make carries weight, that every moment we assume we understand someone, without asking, without listening, we might be stepping on something sacred, their story, their truth, their value. We all carry scars from being misunderstood, from being underestimated, from being reduced to what others saw instead of what we are. And yet, some of us carry that weight not with bitterness, but with grace. Some of us, like Marcus, let our actions speak louder than our accusers ever could. And in doing so, we don't just defend ourselves. We become mirrors, showing the world who they've chosen to be and who they still have time to become. So what about you? Have you ever been misjudged because someone didn't take the time to understand you? Have you ever been overlooked, silenced, or underestimated, only to prove in your own quiet way that you were stronger than anyone believed? If so, then you understand what Marcus stood for, and perhaps you've already lived pieces of this story yourself. That strength, that resilience, isn't loud. It doesn't always get applause, but it moves mountains, it changes minds, and it shows others that integrity still matters in a world too quick to speak and too slow to listen. If this story moved something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let others read it. Let it start a conversation. Let it stop a judgment before it forms, because in every comment section, in every hallway, in every quiet office or bustling city square, someone is struggling not to be mistaken for less than who they are. And perhaps this story, a story not of vengeance but of restraint, not of drama but of truth, can be the spark that opens just one more heart. Remind others, gently but firmly, that what we see is not all there is, that strength wears many faces, and that justice, while delayed, is never truly denied when dignity refuses to bend. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, of resilience, of quiet defiance, of everyday people who rise above what the world expects, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, not for numbers, not for noise, but so that together we keep the flame burning. Because when we amplify voices of dignity, when we reflect on our own assumptions, when we hold space for hard truths, then, and only then, does the world begin to change. Not overnight, not through slogans, but through hearts opening, one moment at a time.